Hi there, this is Rebecca Blizzard, and I am here to talk to you about People First Language. This is Module 9 for EDL 853, Special Education. Let's get started. Okay, here's my table of contents. First, I'm going to define what People First Language is. Then I'm going to critique it. I'm going to talk about some biased language that I've heard. Then I'm going to propose what language could be used instead of that biased language. And finally, my evidence, I'm going to support my ideas with some academic findings. Okay, so what is People First Language? Well, People First Language is using language that puts the person before the disability, diagnosis, or describer. It is a professional and respectful language. So my example right there is the student with dyslexia instead of the dyslexic student. So putting the person before the diagnosis. Well, why do educators need this People First language? A lot of times People First language takes longer. So why do we need it? Because it is outdated to not use People First language. Putting that disability first often makes it feel negative, and it perpetuates those stereotypes. It raises barriers to show differences instead of showing likenesses and acceptance. Okay, so just as with gender and race, those don't define a person. A disability or a medical diagnosis is not the definition of a person. So what is some not so great biased language that I've heard? So sometimes people in the community, they don't really know about the appropriate etiquette that needs to happen when talking with or about a person with disabilities. So it's important that we're a model. So here's some things that I've heard in my own professional life. So a lot of times these words that I have heard are in an adult-only situation. So maybe in a PLC, maybe at a staff meeting, maybe even in a text. So a lot of times, you know, these things are not overheard by the students. So here are some examples. The blind girl, that crazy family is always struggling. Get this wackadoo out of my room. The autistic kid can't. The disabled bathroom. Nonverbal student wants. Okay, so other things that were in the text that we read about: confined to a wheelchair, a dwarf, afflicted with a disability, an abnormal person, a lunatic or a crazy person, having a fit or an episode, or being a vegetable. Okay, so let's change it. Let's figure out what language could be better. How can we make it inclusive and respectful? Okay, so on the left there, I've rewritten exactly those phrases that I've heard at school before. So instead of saying the blind girl, it'd be better to say the girl with a vision disability or a vision impairment. A family in need instead of saying a crazy family. Student with mental health needs instead of wackadoo. Child with autism spectrum disorder. And honestly, we probably need to ask what that child would like to be referred as, or their family. Accessible bathroom instead of disabled bathroom. And a student that communicates with accessible technology instead of nonverbal. Okay, so here's some more People First language. So we need to say wheelchair users instead of confined to a wheelchair. Instead of a lunatic, we need to say a person with schizophrenia if that's truly what their diagnosis is. Instead of dwarf, you say a person of small stature. I've also heard that many times people of small stature like being called little people, but it just depends on their preference. So you need to ask. Having a fit. So instead of saying having a fit or an episode, you say a person having a seizure. And afflicted with a disability, you just say the person who, whatever their disability is. And instead of saying a vegetable, you say a person in a coma. Okay, so other considerations. When we incorporate this People First language, we're really thinking about inclusion. So really highlighting the person. So other behaviors need to happen though to make it an inclusive environment. We can't just use People First language and expect that those are the only rules, the only proper etiquette, professional behavior that we need. So ask first is a really important one, and I mentioned that a minute ago. If a person needs help, don't make assumptions that they need it right away. You need to ask. You don't need to make any assumptions about a person's needs, or you need to ask if they have a guide dog. Please don't pet the guide dog without asking. And then apologize. So if you accidentally make a mistake with a person with a disability, apologize like you would to anyone else. Golden rule applies to everyone. Okay, so what's my evidence? Why should we use this? What's the proof? So according to the CDC, there are 61 million Americans with disabilities, but most of them lead average everyday lives. They've got jobs, they've got families, they have homes. And as a society, we need to make them feel welcome and accepted, so we need to follow that proper etiquette. And I really like this. It's only natural. Disabilities and medical conditions are natural. So while everyone might not have a disability, everyone has had some sort of medical diagnosis in their lifetime. And disabilities and medical diagnoses are not always a constant state. So sometimes they are, but a lot of people, they can flux in and out, especially when you have a medical diagnosis that can go into remission. So disabilities affect the person's environment. So a student who needs adaptive technology to speak might have a tough time on a long camping trip. So as educators, we need to be thinking about how the environment can affect people with disabilities. Okay, I really liked this. If you're unsure, ask the person how they want to be described. So you need to feel comfortable enough with the people in your environment to go ahead and say, what would you like to be called? Okay, and what can we do at school? So we need to look out for those barriers. So if there's something that would hinder a person with disabilities, then we need to make sure that it's removed, or we need to report it. We need to suggest changes for access. So if there can be adjustments to help anyone really, we need to speak up and make sure that our voices are heard. As leaders, we can hire equally. So during employment, during interviews, everyone is welcome, and work as a team. So we need to collaborate together with a flexible working environment and understand other people's needs. Okay, so some final thoughts. To create an inclusive culture in our school and communities, educators must look to themselves for change and advocate for others. So if we use that people first language and our behavior, it follows that appropriate etiquette, we're being a model. And lastly, we need to advocate. So if we have leaders that are making not inclusive choices, we need to speak up. We need to remind other people through modeling of that people first behavior, and we need to be inclusive. Thank you so much for watching. Here are my references, and here's my standard correlation, my relevancy, and reflection. Have a good one. Thank you.